What up, Marsh Pod? Recording this Wednesday just after 8 o'clock Eastern. We just saw the conclusion of Bay Area falling after having a sizable lead over Beasts of the East. That's a big win. And we just got the final as well. Lone Star beats South America. We're going to get to all that. We'll actually loop our way back around to it, but wanted to hit on 5 things that have stood out here through the first 2 days, two and a half days, I guess, of the week, and where it all stands. I think we're starting to reach the point of the season where we're starting to get a good idea of who some teams are. So wins mean something, losses mean something. In most cases, some of these I think you can kind of say, well, that means this or that doesn't mean quite as much, but everything's starting to take shape, which is we're getting away from that early season small sample theater. We're getting into a more consistent look and feel of what we've got. So let's kick it off. Rocky Mountain, huge back-to-back wins. Really were in need of righting the ship. That includes a win over Beasts of the East. They needed it, right? They had their recent struggles, but they've righted the ship. And the win over Beasts of the East, especially considering the latest win that they had tonight over Bay Area, feels a lot bigger. So Rocky Mountain now 7-3, sitting on top of Frontier Division. Meanwhile, they get a loss by Lakeshore Drive to Run DMV, who we'll get to. It's too early, and I'm going to say it a second time. It's too early to start looking at leads. But Rocky Mountain with a 1.5 game lead plus the tiebreaker, they won the head-to-head. It's too early to care about it, like I said, but it steadies a stumble, and that's what Rocky Mountain needed to do. They came out hot out of the gates. There was some skepticism. They started losing some games. You started scratching your head saying, what are we actually seeing? With that last win over Beasts of the East, who with their win tonight are going to be 9-3, most wins in SimWorld, that's really big. And I think we're starting to, like I said, figure out who some of these teams are. Rocky Mountain is a legitimate team. Speaking of Run DMV, they get a massive win over Lakeshore Drive. That loss hurts Lakeshore Drive, I think, as much as it helps Run DMV, because Run DMV needs every win they can get. Atlantis is struggling. Philadelphia is kicking off a very important stretch with a very disappointing loss. This keeps them in the hunt. This is going to be a long road back for Run DMV if they're going to do it. Beast of the East is now 9-3. Gotham 5. I don't believe they play tonight, being the 19th. They don't. So they're going to end today. Run DMV is at 4-5. Gotham 5 is going to be 7-2. It's a stretch for them to get back, as in they're going to have to make some serious ground up, but they need every win that they can get, and this is the start of that, where, again, we're going to kind of start figuring out some of these 500 to sub-500 teams are going to be just that. Run DMV is in that area right now, and I think by the end of April, we're probably going to get a good idea for a lot of these teams. What are they? Are they that 500 to sub-500 team, maybe a game or two above that you're just like, okay, they're okay, but they're not great? Run DMV has been given the benefit of the doubt for a really long time this season, long time being the 2 months that this season has gone on, because of their head coach, Myron Murray. By the end of this month, I think we're going to get an idea of if they're meant to be around or not. And it's going to be tough. They've got APAC, who's struggled. Asia Pacific, they're going to get them next. They're 4-4, and then they show up, or they close out the week with a matchup against Showtime, who's honestly had some of the struggles of their own. So we're gonna learn a lot about a lot of those teams. Let's pivot to Philadelphia, who we're learning about as well. They kicked off a huge 4-game stretch where they really needed to go 2-2. They needed to win both. They needed to win 2 of the next 4 games, and those next 4 games, including their last game, was Indy Stripes, Showtime, Best Coast Ballers, and Bay Area. Indy was the easiest win, in my opinion, and they lost it. This is not a good opportunity for them. This is not a good start to their stretch. I saw it was written in ESPN. James Canton got to it first. Give him credit to it. But to be 2-2 in that stretch was necessary. This, like I said, was the win you thought they could get. Without it, we start to make some questions. They won their last 3, but it kind of felt like it was mediocre talent beyond the arch. Heartland Zombie Stars were in there. They got the win against Rocky Mountain. I think that's kind of where you start painting it as, there's just been this really good team, or at least a team we think is really good. It's one of 3 things. Is the bad team, Philadelphia in this case, better than we expected them? Is the good team, in this instance, Rocky Mountain, worse than we expected them? Or is this an anomaly? And I think in this case, it's the last of those 3. It's the anomaly. We see Rocky Mountain winning some games. We see Philadelphia losing to Indy Stripes. That win, I don't think we can put our hat on it and say that's something that we care about. I think instead they just got them, and that's what happened. Philadelphia now 3 more games. That's not going to get any easier for them. And again, I don't think... Just checking if we're going to have an answer. We won't have any answer. They play Showtime tomorrow night, April 20th. All right, next one. Let's go to the Tropic Division, where I think we have that same instance. Is this a good team? Is this a bad team? Or is this mean nothing? Yacht Club beats the North, which is not the instance we're talking about, but it's a must-need to win for Yacht Club. Let's start there. They needed to do this because South America's struggling, and H-Town has that loss that we'll get to in just a second. Now they are bumped up ahead of South America, who now has lost 4 straight with their loss. They just went final against Lone Star Basketball Club. So they're going to have a half-game lead over them. Again, standings don't mean anything at this point in the season, but it still matters that they're staying above the fray. That's what you need to be focusing on at this point in the season. The counting of games back, games ahead, that's for May, June, July. The keeping above water, keeping pace with the top teams, that's what March and April are about, and Yacht Club did that. Meanwhile, H-Town, that's a tough loss to a 3-7 now AT Aliens team that hasn't really looked good. They've had some really bad losses, but I think it's one of those moments. Is AT Aliens better than we think they are? Is H-Town Hoopers worse than we think they are? Or is this a fluke? I'm going with this as a fluke. Each of our top teams, Rocky Mountain, Gotham 5, Beasts of the East, Bay Area, Lone Star Basketball Club, Southeast Select, Best Coast Ballers, they have all had losses that you look at and you say, that's kind of surprising. The only team that leads their division or is a top 2 team that hasn't had that is the Originators. 3-point loss to a good Bad Boys basketball team earlier in the season. This is H-Town's loss, in my opinion. We're going to find out, again, more games. We're going to get a larger sample size, but I think this is just an instance of H-Town just letting off the gas for one game against a team they should have beaten. This happens all the time. The Houston Rockets beat the Boston Celtics. We don't think the Houston Rockets are suddenly winning a championship, and a lot of us might take the Celtics. That's just what this loss was for H-Town. All right, last point. It just went final. Like we said, Bay Area. We're bringing it back to them. Here's a question that I have now for Bay Area, who is going to be, after this game, 7-3. Best Coast Ballers, I don't believe, plays today. They don't, so by the end of today, by the time this publishes, it's going to be half game up. Again, too early. Stop me if you heard that one before. But here's my question for Bay Area. Can we trust them to win games down the stretch? They struggled yet again. This time it's to the Beasts of the East. They did that against Showtime earlier in the season. They've won 2 of those games. They had a good game against Lone Star Basketball Club in a matchup that I think we should care about, but it's so early in the season. I think we should also say, let's appreciate that was a good win. And they had a good win against Best Coast Ballers, but they kind of dominated that game against Best Coast from the beginning. So of their close games against really good opponents, you're looking at Showtime, which they lost, Asia Pacific, which shouldn't have been a close game, yet it still was, and then here against Beasts of the East, they didn't really do a lot of good things down the stretch. And my question is, with all this talent, do they have the guy? I've talked about it a lot. Do they have the guy? 2 minutes left, get him the ball, he's getting you a bucket. Showtime, for all of their issues, they have that guy, right? Best Coast Ballers, for all of their issues, still has one of those dudes in Lace Darius Outlaw. The Originators have that guy in DJ Wagner. Does Bay Area, they've got really good basketball players. I'm not saying they don't. Caden Shipp, Roy Sanderson, Xavier Pope, Trey Hyman, they've added 2 guys. Is this a team that's still figuring out who their closer is, or do they not have a guy that can close? It's one thing to just lose to Showtime. It's one thing to just lose to Best Coast Ballers. But when you start looking at this Beasts of the East, but when you start looking at it we're starting to get trends. Like I said at the top, the trend right now for Bay Area is in close games. They haven't really done a great job against good opponents of closing it out. They certainly did a good job against Lone Star, so I'm not coming out here saying they can't do it, but it's something to watch. All right, we'll be back on Tuesday of next week. Looks like we got a great Thursday matchup, great Friday, Saturday. Lone Star keeps that rolling. Definitely want to touch base on them next week, but y'all have a great weekend.